Clydesdale Bank plc is a commercial bank in Scotland. Formed in Glasgow in 1838, it is the smallest of the three Scottish banks. Independent until it was purchased by the Midland Bank in 1920, it was sold to its present owners, the National Australia Bank, in 1987. NAB's other British subsidiary, Yorkshire Bank, operates as a division of Clydesdale under its banking licence. As with the two other Scottish banks, the Bank of Scotland and the Royal Bank of Scotland, it retains the right to issue its own banknotes. National Australia Bank confirmed in October 2014 that it planned to exit the UK, and was considering a number of options for Yorkshire and Clydesdale banks, including a possible stock market listing. In October 2015, NAB confirmed it would float Clydesdale Bank plc on the London Stock Exchange in February 2016 through an initial public offering, with an aim of raising £2 billion. History Formation In March 1838, an advertisement appeared for a new joint stock banking company in Glasgow, the Clydesdale Banking Company. It was to be chiefly a local bank having few branches but correspondents everywhere, though it was conceded that a branch in Edinburgh would be necessary. The bank duly opened for business in both cities in May 1838. Chetland described the bank as the creation of a group of Glasgow businessmen of middling order, liberal radicals who were active in the government and charities of the city. The driving figure behind the formation of the bank was James Lumsden, a stationer by business, a councillor, police commissioner and, later, Lord Provost of Glasgow. Another member of the founding committee, Henry Brock, became the bank's first manager. Brock came of a merchant family, was an accountant and one of the founders of the Glasgow Savings Bank. Despite the declaration in the advertisement, in the year after formation the bank opened 3 Glasgow branches as well as its first country branches in Campbelltown and Falkirk. A further 7 had been opened by 1844. These were supplemented by the acquisition of the Greenock Union Bank. Formed in 1840, it had 4 branches in the Glasgow hinterland. Expansion Following the purchase of the Greenock Union, there was little change in the structure of the bank and there were still only 13 branches in 1857. In that year, Clydesdale became the first Scottish bank to produce a printed balance sheet, and it showed assets of £2.7 million and net profits of £70,000. The public disclosure of its strength stood it in good stead, for only months later the Western Bank of Scotland closed its doors, followed the next day by the first closure of the City of Glasgow Bank. Clydesdale gained not only customers but 13 branches from the Western. A few months later came the acquisition of the Edinburgh and Glasgow Bank, which had been weakened by the same economic disturbances. The Edinburgh and Leith Bank, as it was originally, had been formed in 1838 for the benefit of the industrious middle classes, and it had bought the Dumfries-based Southern Bank of Scotland in 1842 and the Glasgow Joint Stock Bank in 1844, the latter leading to the change of name to Edinburgh and Glasgow Bank. Poor lending in the 1845–47 period, particularly to Australia, dogged the bank for the next 10 years and it was eventually taken over by the Clydesdale for a nil consideration. Clydesdale retained 19 of its 27 offices. 5 years later, in 1863, Clydesdale acquired the more successful Eastern Bank of Scotland, like Clydesdale, also founded in 1838. Based in Dundee, it was to have 2 separate offices and boards, one in Dundee, the other Edinburgh. Before opening for business it acquired the Dundee Commercial Bank to serve as its Dundee office. Difficulties with the 2 boards working together led to the Edinburgh Bank being wound up and the Eastern became an essentially Dundee bank. Its acquisition gave Clydesdale its first interests north of the River Tay. Much of the growth in the bank's network had come from acquisitions and the management remained cautious regarding direct branch expansion. However, in 1865, a committee was formed to look at prospects and 16 branches were opened in 2 years. In 1874 the Clydesdale went south of the border and opened 3 branches in Cumberland, but this was seen as following existing trade rather than making a specific attempt to enter the English market. Indeed, Clydesdale was one of the last Scottish banks to acquire a London office. In 1878, the City of Glasgow Bank failed for the second time, leading again to an increase in Clydesdale's deposits and the acquisition of 9 of the Glasgow branches. The scale of the collapse led to further debate on desirability of limited liability and, following legislation in 1879, Clydesdale Bank registered as a limited liability company in 1882. Reid described the period 1890–1914 as the tranquil years, but that did not preclude steady expansion of the branch network from 92 to 153. That was to mark the end of Clydesdale's independent existence. In 1917 the bank was approached by London City and Midland and, although initially resisted, Clydesdale Bank was sold in 1920. However, it continued to operate independently and was always referred to as an affiliate, not a subsidiary. The Glasgow banks suffered more than others in the depressed economy of the interwar period, and from being the largest lender in Scotland in 1920, it fell to 5th place by 1939. Despite this, the bank continued to open branches, particularly in areas enjoying export growth, and the network increased from 158 in 1919 to 205 in 1939. The Midland era Midland had also acquired the North of Scotland Bank in 1923, but the Aberdeen management had fiercely resisted any attempt to merge with Clydesdale. However, the changed competitive market after the Second World War meant that the two banks could not remain separate, and in 1950 they were amalgamated to become the Clydesdale and North of Scotland Bank. Clydesdale had 189 branches and the North of Scotland 161, covering 221 towns between them. Of the 8 Scottish banks, Clydesdale had been the third largest by deposits, the North being the smallest. The merged bank became Scotland's largest in terms of deposits, advances and branches. However, by 1969, mergers elsewhere had reduced the number of Scottish banks to 3, with Clydesdale now being the smallest. Midland needed to rationalise the enlarged Clydesdale but faced resistance. Midland also needed additional capital, and its solution to both challenges was to sell Clydesdale to National Bank of Australia in 1987. Banknotes. Banknote history until prevented by the Bank Charter Act 1844, privately owned banks in Great Britain and Ireland were permitted to issue their own banknotes, and money issued by provincial Scottish, English, Welsh and Irish banking companies circulated freely as a means of payment. While the Bank of England eventually gained a monopoly for issuing banknotes in England and Wales, banks in Scotland and Northern Ireland retained the right to issue their own banknotes and continue to do so to this day. In Scotland, Clydesdale Bank, along with the Royal Bank of Scotland and Bank of Scotland, still prints its own banknotes. 2009 issue the current designs were released in autumn 2009. The obverse designs feature famous Scots, while the reverse designs feature Scotland's UNESCO World Heritage Sites. Previous issue the previous series of Clydesdale notes each depicted a notable person from Scottish history, £5 note featuring Robert Burns on the obverse and a vignette of a field mouse from Burns' poem To a Mouse on the reverse, £10 note featuring Mary Slessor on the front and a vignette of a map of Calabar and African missionary scenes on the back, £20 note featuring Robert the Bruce on the front and a vignette of the Bruce on horseback with a monumental reliquary against a background of Stirling Castle on the back, £50 note featuring Adam Smith on the front and a vignette of industry tools against a background of sailing ships on the back, £100 note featuring Lord Kelvin on the front and a vignette of the University of Glasgow on the back. An image of Adam Smith also features on the £20 note issued in 2007 by the Bank of England, granting Smith the unique status of being the only person to feature on banknotes issued by 2 different British banks, and the first Scot to appear on a Bank of England banknote. Older issues the Clydesdale Bank ceased issuing £1 notes in the late 1980s. These latterly had an image of Robert the Bruce, whilst the contemporaneous £20 notes had an image of Lord Kelvin. The £10 notes issued from 1971 bore an image of Scottish explorer David Livingstone with palm tree leaves and an illustration of African tribesmen on the back. A later issue showed Livingstone against a background graphic of a map of his Zambezi expedition, showing the river Zambezi, Victoria Falls, Lake Nyasa and Blantyre, Malawi. On the reverse, the African figures were replaced with an image of Livingstone's birthplace in Blantyre. Commemorative banknotes Occasionally the Clydesdale Bank issues special commemorative banknotes to mark particular occasions or to celebrate famous people. These notes are much sought after by collectors and they rarely remain long in circulation. Examples to date have included, a £5 issued in 1996 to commemorate the poetry of Robert Burns. On the front of the notes is an overprint of his poems above the portrait. a £10 issued in 1997 to commemorate the work of Mary Slessor. On the back of the note is the map of Calabar and Mary Slessor along with a group of Africans. a £20 to the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting in Edinburgh, October 1997, showing on the reverse the Edinburgh International Conference Centre where the meeting was held, along with Edinburgh Castle in the background and the new Clydesdale Bank building at Tilcross, Edinburgh. a £20 note to mark Glasgow's celebrations as UK City of Architecture and Design, featuring a portrait of Glaswegian architect Alexander Greek Thompson. On the reverse is an illustration of the lighthouse building by Charles Rennie Mackintosh and the dome of Thompson's Homewood House, a £20 to mark the 700th anniversary of Robert the Bruce's coronation, featuring the coat of arms used by the Bruce on the front and a narrative commemorating the anniversary on the rear. a £10 note to mark the bank's sponsorship of the Scottish Commonwealth Games team, depicting the team logo on the front, and on the rear a montage of all the events at the Games, a £5 note featuring a portrait of the Scottish civil engineer, Sir William Arrol and the image of the Forth Bridge to mark the 125th anniversary of the construction of the bridge. This issue is noted as it is printed on polymer rather than paper. Polymer banknotes In March 2015, the Clydesdale Bank became the first bank in Great Britain to issue polymer banknotes. The £5 commemorative notes, issued to commemorate the 125th anniversary of the construction of the Forth Bridge, are printed by De La Rue and are the first in Europe to use the company's Safeguard polymer substrate security feature. The notes also use the Spark orbital security feature which depicts a reflective map of Scotland over a transparent window in the banknote. Although the Clydesdale's 2015 issue are the first plastic banknotes issued within Great Britain, these are not the first polymer banknotes to be issued in the United Kingdom. In 1999, the Northern Bank issued a series of polymer £5 notes depicting the US Space Shuttle. The Bank of England plans to use polymer for its next issue of £5 and £10 notes in 2016. Commonwealth Games In March 2005, Clydesdale Bank became one of the official partners of the Scottish Commonwealth Games team, at the 2006 Commonwealth Games in Melbourne, Australia. This sponsorship builds on the relationship formed by its parent, NAB Group, who are one of the game's main sponsors as well as a key partner with the Australian team, whilst the sister company, Bank of New Zealand, has joined forces to support its national team. The bank also released a series of £10 notes with a Commonwealth Games-related theme for the occasion. See also, Banknotes of the Pound Sterling. References. External links, Clydesdale Bank site, Clydesdale Banknotes.